Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm delighted to have a guest that is, it's night for her now. And it's morning for me, but, this podcast is a global podcast. So I'm excited to welcome Nadene to the show. Nadene, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be on a podcast that's about owning your career, because I think it's just such a wonderful topic. And I've enjoyed listening to some of the episodes myself and hearing about how other people have found their way and really thrived in their careers.
Awesome. Well, we like to hear that you have listened to the show. Speaking of owning your career, the show is about being in the driver's seat. When did you realize that you were in the driver's seat for your career?
Well, I began my career really, the clinical psychology career anyway, thinking I would work in hospitals, so trained as a clinical psychologist, and I was really proud to get a clinical psychology job. And just some things changed in my life after I had children. I was having to commute a lot longer because I'd moved to a different place. And then within Australia, private practice became way more viable just through some government programs that were now available. And so I started working on building my own private practice, and I did that quite easily. And then I realized, hang on a minute, I'm going to have to do this for another 40 years. So I've sort of had different times where I've changed what I'm going to do in my career. But I think that point where, one of the things people don't realize about working in a private practice therapy is that you're quite limited to the hours that you have to see therapy clients, and it's quite emotionally demanding work. So sometimes you get stuck thinking, is this all I'm going to be able to do? And then really, I think a very big crunch point where I absolutely had to drive my career to the level that I'm working at it in now is that very same government program that made it possible for me to be in private practice and for it to be a sustainable career. During the COVID, they announced that all therapists delivering services using this program could only charge the rebate amount, which was 50% less than the recommended fee for psychology services, right? So there was this 3-week period where I didn't have any say in what I could charge in my business. And I had no idea that they could control me to that degree. And so I had this sort of fledgling coaching online program business that I was nurturing. And I thought, I have to do it because I can't be in a position where this can happen again, where people can literally dictate what I can charge, how long I have to do it for. I mean, I remember feeling relieved after 3 weeks when they pulled it back, because being a therapist, you're committed to your clients and you've offered them this service. So I didn't feel like I could withdraw those services. But at the same time, fortunately for me, I had some other streams of income coming in, so it was okay. But some practices were looking at going bankrupt if they had to continue at that level, because that rebate amount doesn't actually allow you to service your business. So I think, there's just been a couple of changes of, I guess, what you think is going to be sustainable for you as a younger person. And there was nothing about that hospital job that was bad. I liked my team, I liked the work. But when I became a parent, that just needed to shift a bit. But then things like this, that, what came with COVID. So there's a lot about COVID and what it did to the world and communities that I hate. But in terms of what happened in my business and my decision to really take charge and not allow the business to be driven by government and other programs. And so now I'm working in a business in which I think 90% of it has got nothing to do with that rebate that I was telling you about. It's all coaching, it's all training, it's all consulting with other psychologists and skilling them up. And so it's all basically private fee paying work. Plus, it's great. The programs go really well and income comes in through that. And I don't even have to be present anymore, which was really quite difficult for me at some point. I was sort of thinking like, oh, well, then when you're on holidays, there's no income there. And it just wasn't a lot of flexibility and no ways really to be able to scale the business in any way when it's all, unless I saw more and more clients, which I wasn't able to do for my own mental health. So that's really,
Let me jump in here. Let me jump in here on the conversation. So when you were growing up, what did you want to be?
Well, actually, I started off my first career, which is a failed career. I loved musical theatre. So I used to like to go and see shows. I did all the shows in high school. And when you're what do they say, big fish in a small pond, it all seemed like really possible. And I was encouraged to go off and do that. And I ended up in the university course studying music. But at that point, I realized a couple of things. One, when I was doing it full time, I didn't enjoy it. So it wasn't really a hobby anymore. It didn't intellectually stimulate me at all, or very much. And the other thing was I could see I did not have the skills and the type of personality that you need to really excel and make a career in something like musical theatre, touring the nation or going to Broadway or whatever. And like, I think there's an aspect of being real about where your gifts and talents lie. And it wasn't until I was in the bigger pond and being a small fish that I really could see like, oh, this won't happen for me. And I would probably end up being a music teacher, which I just don't want to have a career in a school system. That wouldn't be a good fit for me at all. So I exited into psychology. And at that point, as a young person, I was really like thinking about what would I like to do? I'd like to help people. And it seemed like a job where you could have a nice office. I was really young. I was only 18. I could have maybe some nice clothes and a nice office. And the funny thing about that is because I started in hospitals, we didn't have nice offices. We had tiny little broom closets. So I remember having one that was so small that you had to let the client in through the door and then pull the chair out when you close the door again because there wasn't enough room. So it was a long time before I got the nice room as a therapist. But it started there, and I got that intellectual stimulation that I was looking for. I loved my undergraduate degree. I did a lot of things like women's studies and philosophy, and it was quite a mixed degree. So I got a lovely broad education while I was there in my undergrad. And I often say to people,
very interesting.
Yeah, it's that stuff that I use a lot in my career now, sometimes more than, say, developmental psychology 101, because it taught me a lot about people and society. And I just loved those topics.
Awesome. So I'm curious, Nadene, what resources helped you to make the shift, to make the decision that music is not going to sustain you, and to make the shift over to something that you loved, psychology? What helped you to make that pivot?
I think really that I had to take a risk and think about the things that I found interesting outside of music and that might work. I have to say I didn't 100% know because I was very young. And so I just tried that. And it's actually something that has worked for me a lot, is to think, I don't know exactly, but how about if I try it? And then from there, I will lean in more to the things that I do like.
I love that. Trying something new. And you don't have to have it all figured out, which is what I've learned in my career. So, what comes up for you as you think about the different pivots that you have taken and trying different things? What would you say your formula is for owning your career? What are the key ingredients?
Well, I think you have to believe that it's possible. And that's something that took me a long time to get to actually believe that at any point I could own it, I could make a change, and that was allowed. So I had to give myself permission to own it.
What does giving yourself permission to own your career look like?
Well, I think it's about, for me personally, if something isn't working, even though society says that's a great job, or why aren't you happy just working as a public servant? If there's something that's not enough, you're allowed to have more. Or, for example, I am a really good therapist, and choosing to see less and less therapy clients originally made me feel guilty. So I had to give myself permission to have a career that was about me and not about everybody else.
I love that. I love that. If you had to title a book based on your career body of work or your career experiences, what do you think the title would be?
Oh, I think something like give yourself permission to show people what you can do. You're capable of so much more than you know.
Yeah, that's powerful. I have often found that when you make the decision to go all in, to do what it is you want to do, things start to happen, and there's more peace and more focus. That's what I found in my career. Once I decided fully, this is what I want to do, and I held myself accountable and moved forward, those actions started to happen.
Yes, because you would know it's quite frightening, really, to give up something that you're very good at. And that holding account part of actually saying, these are the real risks and these are the potential consequences, but also this is the real possible benefit. And the cost is the lack of freedom and feeling almost like you're in a prison. And sometimes that prison is of your own making. But yeah, it's really, I agree. I think there's a tremendous feeling of peace, and you sort of relax internally, even though sometimes it can be stressful with the risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Being an entrepreneur is, it can be stressful indeed. I definitely have had those experiences. So talk to me about, in terms of taking risk in your career, what has helped you to decide to take a risk?
Well, I think there's been sort of pivotal moments where I felt that I needed a change. And I would say that I'm not taking really out there risks that are going to lead to financial doom. And so I would never recommend that to anyone. I believe in scaffolding your way up to that change and making sure that you're ready. But I think that for me has been just knowing deep in my heart that I cannot keep doing this for a long time, or I'm bored of it. And this is part of the permission too. I'm allowed to be bored, and I'm allowed to move on to something else. So those are things for me that make it worth taking a risk. Some of the stuff for me that has felt extremely risky, that I'm a lot better at now, is being quite visible in the personal branding side of my business. But that was, for me, it was very hard in the beginning.
Oh, well, thank you for your transparency. Yeah. Sometimes my clients tell me that it's hard for them to talk about what they do well, toot their own horn. So yeah, visibility can be a thing because you've got that internal chatter that can get in your way. But did you give yourself permission to be visible?
Well, I didn't. I actually just decided I was going to have to do it, even though sometimes it made me feel physically ill. And in psychology treatment, we talk about exposure for anxiety, which means doing the things that you're scared of. And so that's what I really did in the beginning. I think I started putting out 3 little videos a week talking about things like the self-doubt that a lot of therapists have and the things that I coach on. And that over time, like now I'll put out a video, I mean, it's 5 years later, but I don't even think about it. But in the beginning, it was like, oh no, and how do I look? And what are people going to say about that? But it's, on the whole, people have responded very positively to me. And I would say that to anyone who's listening. You will always pay more attention to people who give you criticism or who are negative. But in reality, they are the tiny minority. And so it's about trying to train yourself out of focusing on them, and instead, speak to those people who do want to know, who do like what you say. And it's your human nature to be like, oh no, you know, someone doesn't like me, or maybe that's a threat. But yeah, so if you're very scared of that, or the idea of tooting your horn, and I think there's ways that you can tell people what you excel at without being you know, crossing your values lines either. You know, the two are completely possible, but it's about, you know, working out your own bottom line for how you're going to do that.
You made me think of Brene Brown and her TED Talk.
Oh yeah.
Where, I don't know if you've seen it, where she talks about reading the feedback once the video was posted, and focusing on the negative. And it can be that during a performance review where your manager is giving you feedback and all you can hear is the negative things. So appreciate the conversation about, really, you know, that's a small piece of it. And it's something that we do have to remember, to not get stuck in our careers because of one comment, or because of focusing on what other people say. You can focus on what you want to do, listen to your voice, as well as, you know, allies that you have that are telling you about your strengths.
That's right. And I think for me, having mentors, some that I've self-selected, some that I feel like selected me as when I was younger in my career, and they could often see the strengths and capacity that I had that I didn't have a sense of. And so I feel like I carry around mental templates of those people. And so all of that helps build sort of this team around you. But I think many of us feel a bit like Brene, and I can only imagine the amount of comments that Brene would get, because it's such a massive TED Talk now. I personally don't experience that level of commenting ever, but it's just really something in human nature as a whole, because of our need to be socially connected, that we do worry a lot. But I love what you said about the performance reviews, actually, because sometimes people can be haunted from something that was said 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
It may or may not have been true, and they've possibly grown from that, but they're still, you know, reliving that time when so-and-so said this. And
absolutely. And by the way, listeners, there are people that will give you feedback, and it doesn't mean that because they give you feedback that is 100% true. I remember in my career where a manager said, you're not assertive enough, like you don't have enough edge. And so I bent myself into a pretzel to have edge. And then the manager was like, you have too much edge. And it's like, oh my gosh. And so you're flexing yourself to be who other people want you to be. So I would just caution you to take in the feedback and then decide, do I want to act on this feedback? Because that's one person's perspective, even if that's your manager's perspective.
Absolutely, because it's a lot of power to give to someone too. And I also think if it's not congruent with who you are, so to become, sometimes assertive blends into aggressive, in my opinion, in some people's words anyway. But because there's ways to be more quietly assertive, and that may not look like what that manager perceived. So then if you have to behave in a way that you go home not liking yourself for, it's not worth it. Yeah, there's some growing pains with careers. And so keep that in mind. We still want you to be in the driver's seat, which really means taking control of your career and not being laissez-faire, hands-off with your career. So tell me, Nadene, are there resources that you can think of that have been pivotal to you? I like the mental templates that you just mentioned. Are there other resources that come up for you over the years that stood out as being very helpful to help you advance in your career? That's so, yeah. So I do think the more I progress into my career, the more I actually lean into my own paid mentoring and coaching support, because I found that I just hit points where I can't do it myself, and I need someone to challenge my thinking, and not in the therapy type environment, although I have had quite a bit of therapy as well. But it kind of not only supports me through my own doubts about certain parts of the business, and is it, you know, am I going to handle it, or should I do this, or should I drop that? It's lovely to have someone who just has dedicated time for you to hear that doesn't really have a vested interest either way in the way that other people in your life might have. So that definitely, when I decided to stop being what I call hyper autonomous and doing it all myself, really did help me grow in my business. But that requires you to own that you need support and be open to feedback. Good mentoring and coaching feedback isn't super critical, but they can be saying, why are you doing that? Tell me your thinking around that. And it makes you say out loud, and then you hear where, if we go back to the giving yourself permission, where maybe you're not giving yourself permission, or you've put up a stop sign that says, no, if I go beyond that, I am one of those horrible people tooting my horn, or, whatever the block or the concern for you is. So definitely that as well. And then I think that all becomes part of your mental team as well that you pull around you. But I think, in the sort of business I have, it's about working out what can I do myself and what do I need someone to help with, because there's a lot of tech, and possibly the same with the business that you have. So I need to sort of know how to use it, but I've learned I can't expect myself to know how to fix everything, and sometimes I will need support with that. So again, that's allowing myself to be assisted and knowing that that's normal.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned a coach as a resource, and also mental health support in passing. I think that's important. I talk about that in my book, 52 Tips for Owning Your Career, that having therapy to heal career wounds is a great thing, because some of us can be stuck or stalled because of a career pain point that we can't move past. And I believe in mental health resources, but also I love that you brought up investing in coaching to help you along as well. So after the help that you need, that's what you said, Nadene.
Yeah, that's right. And there are parts of business that will bring up childhood wounds and all sorts of things, because very often we can go along okay in a certain, I think for me, some of the stuff that has come up for me in having a business would not have happened if I'd stayed as a government employee in a hospital, because I wouldn't have had to push against certain patterns, certain beliefs. So that's where, sometimes that's where you might need the therapy, because it's actually deeper stuff. It's not just a little bit of mindset block here and there. Some workplace incidents, as you mentioned, some of them are minor and some of them are pretty bad. And so they do actually need therapy intervention. So I'm happy that we're talking about that, because certainly, there can be bullying and all sorts of things that people need to heal from.
Yep. I have a friend who is always talking about the bullying he had in the workplace. So you're absolutely right. There are a heap of things that can go on in the workplace that are unchecked, and you need additional support to work through them. So keep that in mind, listeners. Nadene, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Please tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to do so.
Sure. You can go to my website, which is nadenevanderlinden.com. And if you'd like to sign up for the mailing list there, you will get a little toxic self-doubt busting cheat sheet. So if you can relate to that idea of having, a lot of self-doubt that is more than what you need. So often we need a little self-doubt to keep ourselves in check and, not becoming totally self-aggrandizing. So knowing our strengths and weakness from a healthy perspective. But if you're very anxious and not feeling confident all the time, it's possible that your self-doubt has gone to that toxic level. So that's there for you if you would like to. It's been lovely to talk with you, Simone. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nadene. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.